What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another video of my 2026 season preview series, where today we're going to be talking about the Indianapolis Colts. If you haven't seen one of these videos yet, I am basically going to go through a review of the 2025 offense and defense for the Colts, as well as get into the offensive departures and additions, as well as the defensive additions and departures. Then get into some storylines for each side of the ball, and then finally cap off the video with a look at the schedule in 2026 and a prediction for the Colts record in 2026. Getting right into it with the Indianapolis Colts offense in 2025, it was a team that was really performing well 13 weeks into the season, and then it came out that Daniel Jones was playing through a fractured fibula, and then not too long after that, Daniel Jones ended up tearing his Achilles in week 14 against the Jacksonville Jaguars, obviously taking him out of the final 4 games of the season. At that point, the Colts needed to call on the I guess talents or the duties of former franchise quarterback Phillip Rivers, and they ended up having Riley Leonard play a couple of games as well. Through it all, the guy who was a star the entire season was Jonathan Taylor. He was the main cog of this offense, carrying for almost 5 yards a carry, 20 total touchdowns as a whole, and probably the best, one of the best running back seasons we saw last year. Now, Indianapolis did not do a lot in terms of adding to their offense. They signed a couple of backup guys in Nick Westbrook-Akine and Easton Stick on one-year deals, and they drafted some lesser-known guys like Jalen Farmer in the 4th round. He was a guy who started the last 2 seasons for Kentucky on that offensive line. Seth McGowan was a guy who played well in Kentucky last year. I believe he had around 700 rushing yards. And Deion Burks is a guy who played, almost everywhere on the college football map over his career. Again, kind of just to drive home the point, Indianapolis really did not add a whole lot, especially when you look at who they lost. Compared to who they added, you would say that they probably got worse. And now looking at those departures, you see some, not names that are all pros, but Braden Smith has been a guy who, even though he's had some injury issues, he's been a mainstay on the offensive line for Indianapolis. And to see him go to the Houston Texans on a 2-year deal, that's almost like it's going to hurt twice, seeing him on the other side of the ball 2 times a year. And then trading Michael Pittman to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittman, for the last couple of years, hasn't had the production that he had in previous years earlier in his career. And to see guys like Alec Pierce and Tyler Warren kind of, step up in his absence, it kind of led Indianapolis to the probably correct decision that moving on from Michael Pittman was in the best interest of their own team and as well as Michael Pittman's interests as well. And now the storylines for this offense in 2026. The first one is that, Jonathan Taylor got a new deal. He got a 2-year, I believe, over $50 million extension on his contract. How is he going to perform after the deal? It's always kind of a talking point for these running backs who get big deals. How do they perform after they get the money? Daniel Jones returning from an ACL tear as well as a fractured fibula last year. I really think if we were to go back and, if we could affect how the Colts were going to finish the season last year, somebody would have tried to convince them not to play Daniel Jones after it came out that he had a fractured fibula. I know a torn Achilles, some people might not think that they are really related, but when you're talking about fracturing one of the main bones in your leg, I really have to think that there's some sort of relation between a torn Achilles and a fractured fibula. Last storyline, what happens with Anthony Richardson? Obviously a first-round pick a few years ago. He got hit in the eye with a stretching band last year, had to go to the hospital for it, and it turned out to be a pretty scary situation for him and the team. So what happens now? Does he play again for the Colts? I think not. I think many people would think not. Does he play for somebody else? It's starting to almost think that he's not going to even play for anybody else. The hope that would be that, somebody could look at Anthony Richardson's previous tape and say, I want to take a chance on that guy. But there's nothing really from his tape that makes teams really want him, I think. There's the one pass that everyone loves to bring up at least 3 times a year of him taking the deep shot early in the first quarter against the Houston Texans to Alec Pierce. Everyone loves that video, and they think, oh, that's exactly what Anthony Richardson could do. But we've only seen it once, and we've never really seen much else other than that. So I think that's kind of why we're at this point with Anthony Richardson and the Colts, where he's still on the roster, but he's probably never going to play for the team ever again. On to the defense now. This was a team who honestly was probably the reason that they had the late season collapse. This team started 8-2 last year, and because defensively they really couldn't do anything well, and match that with the fact that they lost their starting quarterback. I mean, this team was giving up 40 points to San Francisco late in the year. They gave up 40 to the Houston Texans almost. It just was a defense that was pretty much outmatched. And to be fair, you look at who they were going against early in the season, when they're going against Tennessee, when they're going against Las Vegas, when they're going against Arizona, maybe that inflated what we thought about them as a defense and as a team as a whole. But we kind of saw late in the year, once they were facing Houston, Jacksonville, Seattle, they really couldn't keep up with any of these teams, and they suffered for it. I do really praise Indianapolis for the work that they did in the offseason. They got guys in free agency like Michael Clemens and Arden Key, and they also got guys in free agency that are going to be depth pieces, like a Cam Taylor-Britt, who played for Lou Anarumo in Cincinnati a few years ago, Wanye Thomas as a backup safety. They trade for somebody like a Colby Wooden from the Green Bay Packers, and they also add some guys in the draft like CJ Allen, AJ Halsey, guys who can come in and either be starters on day one or be developmental pieces for the future. There were some big names that departed this team in the offseason, namely Kwity Paye, who signed with the Las Vegas Raiders on a 3-year, $48 million deal. Now, production-wise, Kwity Paye wasn't ever a number one pass rusher. He wasn't ever really a top name guy on this defense, but he was a guy who in 2023 and 2024 was an 8.5 sack type player, and it's just somebody who you would love to have in the fold. Nick Cross also signs with the Washington Commanders on a 2-year deal, another guy who you liked having in the fold in that secondary. And this team also traded away Zaire Franklin. They traded him to the Green Bay Packers after he was with Indianapolis for his entire 8-year career. And the storylines for this defense in 2026. Will Sauce Gardner prove to be worth multiple first-round picks? Now, if you noticed, in my additions for the offense and defense, you didn't see a first-round pick. That's because Sauce Gardner in 2026 and 2027 is the first-round pick. Last year, he got injured almost right away. The hope is that 2026 and beyond is where he's going to prove his value. Whether that happens or not, we don't know yet. Who's going to replace Zaire Franklin? I mentioned this was a guy who spent his entire 8-year career as a member of the Indianapolis Colts. He finished with over 700 tackles. He was a really good contributor in the pass rush as well. It's going to be either Akeem Davis-Gaither, who they signed from Arizona, or it's going to be CJ Allen, who they drafted out of Georgia in the second round. Whoever it is, they need to... The ultimate quality is being dependable. Zaire Franklin, for the last 4 years especially, has been one of the more dependable players for the Indianapolis Colts defense and a real leader. So he's going to have a massive void to fill. It's going to be probably between those two guys to fill that void. This is also year 2 of Lou Anarumo's defense, and I would venture to say that the first year was not very good. And again, it probably was the reason that this team went from 8-2 to finishing, I believe, 8-9 and out of the playoff race. So it's going to be a massive need. If this team wants to make the playoffs in 2026, it's really going to be a need that this defense improves. Looking at the schedule, though, I really don't see too many teams that Indianapolis is really better than. I think you have your 2 Tennessee games. You have games against Miami, the Giants, and Cleveland. Outside of that, I would say most of these teams are at the same talent level, if not more talented than Indianapolis. And I think a lot of these teams, talent aside, are just better than Indianapolis. And that's why I really think I could see this team bottoming out in 2026. I think the floor is 5-2, though. Like I said, there's those games where they are more talented than Tennessee through and through. They're more talented than Miami through and through. They're more talented than the New York Giants, I think. But they still are not better than even Kansas City. They're not better than Houston. They're not better than Jacksonville. And I don't know if the coaching staff is really great either. We haven't seen anything since Shane Steichen has taken over as the head coach of this team. What have we seen from this team? They started out 8-2 last year, and honestly, a lot of coaches that would start 8-2 if they already have a previous track record of not making the playoffs and not performing well and not making the most out of a first round top 10 selected quarterback. A lot of coaches will get fired if they ended up not making the playoffs after starting 8-2 like Shane Steichen did last year. So I'm interested to see how 2026 goes, but I'm not hopeful. And that's why I think a ceiling, this could be a team that sneaks into the wild card round, but that's really if everything goes right. If Jonathan Taylor is as productive as he was last year, and somebody in that wide receiver room becomes a solid, dependable number 2, because Alec Pierce is the number 1 now. And as much as everybody wants to say, oh, he leads the league in yards per reception, I don't really care. He had 47 catches last year. I don't care how many yards each of those went for, because the offense, let's be honest with ourselves, this offense ran through Jonathan Taylor last year. Defenses were not afraid of Alec Pierce. They were not afraid of Ashton Doolin. They were not afraid of Josh Downs. They're not afraid of anyone on this offense except for Jonathan Taylor. So it's really going to be important if this team wants to make the playoffs that A, somebody else in the wide receiver room steps up, and B, the defense is much, much better than they were last year. That's going to be it for today's video. Make sure you like, make sure you comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.